Well, hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Now, at the end of last year, I mentioned in a video that I was going to be adding something new for 2020 into my video content. Well, that time has now come. As a lot of you shown a great interest in my photography, I thought I'd do a tutorial on how I edit my photos, with the possibility later on of showing you guys how to edit a video for my video content. So if that's something you're interested in, then stay tuned and I'll see you after this. But before we dive into the editing software and start editing our first photos, a couple of points I need to make you aware of. Firstly is that you need to be familiar with the camera that you're using, whether it's a DSLR, a phone, or any sort of camera device. You need to know how to use it. You need to know the settings of your camera and what to change in different lightings, etc. The photos that you take need to be properly composed. They need to be in focus and they need to be of the correct exposure. Now we'll have a quick look at some examples in a second through the editing software. Because although we use an AdobeLightroom and it's a very powerful software, if any of those three things don't work out, then the editing software isn't going to save that photo. So if the photo is completely out of focus, whatever you do on the software, it's not going to improve your photo. If it's overly exposed or underexposed, again, you can't save the photo. So you need to be sure that you're taking good photos. And if you're not familiar with that, then get yourself on a photography course. I went on a few to show me how to change settings in the camera and how to take pictures. That's the main point I'm trying to get at. You need to be able to take a good picture before you even start editing it. Now, the second point I want to discuss quickly is format. Picture format. Now, most devices, when you take a picture, whether it be a telephone, a camera, normally the standard format for saving a picture to your camera is a JPEG file. Now, the advantages of a JPEG is that they have smaller files, it's quicker, and you can immediately upload your photos from your telephone, say, to social media. Now, the disadvantages of a JPEG is that it compresses the file and you lose a lot of the data. Now that makes a difference, and when you want to edit the photos, a JPEG, you can only make slight adjustments. Basically, when you take a shot, the camera will decide itself color saturation, contrast, and how sharp, etc. It decides all that for you, compresses the file, saves it to your memory card. As I said, you can only then make minimal changes to a JPEG photo. Now when you shoot in RAW, the camera doesn't decide any of that for you. The control is then in your hands. The disadvantages of a RAW file is that they're much bigger files, so you can't get as many pictures onto a memory card, but you can just upgrade your memory card to a larger one. Now, the massive advantages of shooting in RAW is that it retains every bit of information from that photo when it's saved to the memory card. So then when you come on to editing your photo, you can change an amazing amount of stuff within that picture. So change your photo format to RAW, and then you're good to go. So let's dive into Lightroom. Now these are some pictures I've taken over the past few days. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how I got from this photo here, how I got from there to the finished product of this one. So if I show you a before and after, how things looked. So this is a picture before and this is the end product. So we're going to talk about how I did that first off. Now, as I said, it's not going to be a full tutorial into Lightroom. It's more of an insight on how I do things. So let's start off with this picture here. So the first thing I always do is you crop the photo to whatever platform you're uploading it to. Now the majority, Facebook, YouTube, etc., you crop it to 16:9. That's the standard crop. Or if you're uploading to Instagram, the standard aspect ratio is 4:3. So depending on what platform you're editing to, depends on how you crop it. So I've edited this photo for Instagram. So we're going to go with a 4:3 crop. So once that's cropped, you just need to move it about to make sure everything is nice and central. So the bike is the subject in this picture, so it needs to be nice and central. Now the second thing I do is to edit the horizon. Either you can twist it and just use one of the one of the lines, the grid lines, to level it out. Now it's a bit difficult on this one because we've got this green mound here that isn't part of the horizon. This is kind of in the middle ground. So we'll see how that looks. Yeah, it looks straight to me. There is another way you can do it on this. You can then draw a line from this side across to the other side. Now because this mound isn't actually part of the horizon, I'd probably go with that. So we've cropped it, we've straightened the photo out, lovely jubbly. Now the second thing I do is edit the white balance. So basically you click on this white balance dropper here and click on the sort of whitest part of the photo. So it's made it slightly bluer. If you look what happens if you click on the blue sky here, it changes it into a warmer sort of tone. So yeah, we'll go with that. We'll see what happens. So basically, the first thing I do now is on a photo is I drop down the highlights and up the shadows. Now this is what I come back to the point where I made out this, earlier, is that the photo needs to be properly exposed. Now what I mean by that is you need to expose the photo for the highlights. Now what that means is if you look back to this picture here, the highlights are obviously everything that's in the sort of in the light, and the shadows, self-explanatory, everything that's within the shadows. So this is an example of how to overexpose a photo. So basically the first thing I do is drag down the highlights, and you see what happens here. It makes the clouds really sort of dramatic, but I've still lost a lot of the information here on the sun because it's overexposed. And then when you up the shadows, this is what happens then. The shadows become they become alive. And the next example, that's probably underexposed. Now if you saw this on the back of your camera on your telephone, you'd probably delete it, but it's not necessary. It's slightly underexposed, I'd say. So if I drop the highlights down on the clouds, there's a lot of information there to play with. And you can up the shadows like you can on another one, but I'm already maxed out now on the shadows and it's probably a bit too dark. You can up the exposure slightly, and it does come back to life. So it's not too bad. But that's what I mean by overexposing photos and underexposing. So you need to make sure that you've got your highlights correctly exposed. So let's get back to our edit. So the first thing I'm going to do now is drop down the highlights. You can see now the clouds become really nice, really sort of dramatic. Everybody has a style of editing photos. I like to go on the dramatic side. It's easy to push stuff too far and then it looks sort of unnatural. So we'll up the shadows. Already that photo looks amazing just by changing the highlights, dropping the highlights down and up in the shadows. What I will do now is slightly up the exposure. Now things change. You can always come back to things if you don't like it or you need to make adjustments. So I've upped the exposure slightly, and that's up the exposure of the whole picture. We're adding a bit of contrast. You can see you can mess about with these sliders and you can see how it affects the photo. Now you can't do all these massive adjustments, as I said, on a JPEG, just on RAW. So we put a bit of contrast in. If we up the whites or bring down the whites, this is what happens to the picture. So I'm going to slightly up the whites. You want to make small changes. If you go too much overboard with it, the photos look, as I said, they look unnatural. Add a bit of black in there. Now clarity, this is the next thing I use on the photo. If you up the clarity, this makes it really dramatic. And you see a lot of them online. People always max out the clarity. And again, it looks a bit unnatural. So just add a bit of clarity in there. Nice. So vibrance and saturation, I tend to leave alone and come down to here, which is our sort of HUE, saturation and luminance. So this is where you can really sort of play about with the colors. So on the HUE, you can basically then change, say this grass, the green grass, you can change the color of the grass, make it yellow, make it more green. Again with the sky, if you change the blues, that's more of a purple. You can go down to a sort of aqua sky, but again, looks unnatural. I tend to leave these alone, but I like to mess around with the saturation and the luminance. So what I would do here is probably make the sky a tad bluer. Look what happens if you go too far. Looks naff. So add a bit of blue, a bit more saturation in the sky, and add probably in the greens, I'd probably drop it down a bit. The oranges, I want to make the bike sort of stand out and really punchy, so I'll up the oranges from the orange on the bike itself. Probably leave that as it is. Now I come down to the luminance. So basically the luminance is, you can sort of brighten up the grass. So on the greens here, you can either brighten it up, make it slightly darker. I'm probably going to brighten the grass slightly. Probably leave that as it is. The sky, I would probably make it slightly darker. Split toning, I don't really use this as much. Basically, you can add into the highlights, so I could add some purple here into the highlights, up the saturation, and it makes the highlights then in the sky, gives it sort of a purple tone to it. Now you can mess about with that, and the same in the shadows. You can add a bit of maybe blue in the shadows, but I don't tend to mess around with that as much, so we'll just reset those. So coming further down, this is how we sharpen up the video. Now in this box here, you can select a part of the video where you can see the details of something nice and clear. So I'd probably click on there, and then up the sharpening. I normally go to about halfway, but here you can see it makes the photo a bit noisy. What we mean by that is it looks a bit fuzzy. If you go too far with the sharpening, it will fuzz right out or be incredibly noisy and looks a bit naff. So don't push the sharpening too far. I'd probably go just under halfway. And luminance then here, noise reduction. So luminance, you can up that, and it basically then cancels out this fuzziness, this noise in the picture. You can reduce it, but it will limit the detail in the photo. So again, if you go too much with all these sort of things, you can make the photo look unnatural. Then I come down here to lens corrections, and I just enable the profile corrections, and it will tell you then what camera I was using, what lens I was using in the settings of the camera, and remove the chromatic abrasion. So this will just change any sort of lens corrections needed. Here you can come down to effects, and you can add sort of vignette so that you get a nice sort of darker ring effect around the photo. Now again, you can push this too far, you can do little amounts, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave that because I don't want any dark corners in the top of the sky, but I do want some down the bottom. So that's basically all the main changes that I would add to the photo. So what I'm going to do now is add a filter to the top of the sky, or to the sky, because I want to make the sky a bit more dramatic. So I've dropped dropped a filter over the top. Now if you press O, it will show you where the filter has been applied to. Now I don't want to make any changes to the bike, so what I will do is go to the brush tool and erase the filter that has been put over the top of the bike, because I don't want to change the bike settings, just the sky for now. I'll come back to the bike in a second. So I'll just delete that part of the filter that's over the bike, press O, cancel that out. So now I can come into the settings. So again, if I drop the exposure now on this filter, it will only change the sky settings and not from the whole photo. So basically what I want to do is make the sky a bit more dramatic. So I'll drop the exposures down slightly, add a bit of contrast. Again, I'll drop the highlights, up the shadows slightly. Maybe I'll add a bit of blue into them. What's happening to my PC? It's gone all slow. And add some more clarity into the sky. And I probably, if you mess around with the dehaze, you can really sort of add some drama into the clouds. Now again, I don't want to go too far, so that's probably good for now. So I'm going to add a new graduated filter, and I want to make these corners slightly darker. And what I want to do is lower the exposure here, make it a bit darker. Again, I'll move slightly, press O, because the filter has then changed some effects in the sky, which I don't want, so I shall erase that part of the filter that's in the sky, because I want that to stay nice and dramatic. That's okay for now. So I'm going to add a new one, and then do the same on this side of the picture, about there. Lower the exposure just to darken it up. Now this is the same sort of effect if you get a vignette, but you get that in the top of the sky. And as I said, I didn't want that to happen. Again, I'll press O and erase the filter that is added then to this fence and part of the sky here, because as I said, that needs to stay as it was. So the idea being is that I can probably move that one up a bit slightly more actually. The idea is the subject is in the middle of the photo here, and I want to channel your eyes into the subject matter, so the bike. So by darkening these two corners here, you automatically then follow into the photo, and this fence here on the outside, that kind of leads you out of the photo. That's what's good about composing a good photo. For this one, I was lying on the ground. It's always good for bikes, for bike photography, to take the picture up into the bike. Never take a picture down looking onto the bike. But we've got some other stuff in the picture. We've got this fence here in the middle ground, and it leads you then out of the photo. What I would probably change now is probably to up the exposure of the bike, just the bike slightly. So I'll take my brush tool here and then brush over the bike on parts of the bike, just as an example. We won't go into too much detail. So this is the lowering the exposure then on this filter. So I want to up the exposure slightly on the bike. Yeah, not sure about that. My laptop's making the process a bit difficult here because it's gone all slow. But you get the kind of gist of what I'm trying to say there. Is I've just upped the exposure just to the bike. Probably add a bit of clarity in there. Lower the highlights slightly. Again, you can make your own adjustments, but that's basically the gist. So if we look in a before and after, that's what the picture looked like before, and that's what the picture looks like now. Again, the bike is overexposed there, but my laptop's playing silly buggers. So that's basically what you can do with the picture. Now, I would make some adjustments to the bike, but as I said, my laptop's been a bit of a pain, so I'm just going to leave that for now. If you were then happy with the final result, you can then click on export. You will then get a window pop up, export one file. Basically, that's just your settings that you can change where the file is going to be saved to on your computer, so you can find it later. You can give the file a name. Your file settings and image size, that depends, that varies on what you want to do with the photo. Here then, obviously, once it's exported, it then saves it as a JPEG. No further changes need to be made, so you can export as a JPEG. Your quality at 100%. Image sizing, that varies, depends on whether you want to just upload it to devices or online. The settings will be different if you then want to export the photo. If it was going to be printed or enlarged and put on canvases, the settings vary on that, but there's plenty of tutorials out there. It's a bit complicated that show you how you would do that. Again, here your output sharpening, a high amount of sharpening, and here it's set up for a display or a screen, PC screen, and a few other settings here. And here down at the bottom, I put my watermark on. This basically then on the bottom right hand side of the corner of the photo, and will be my logo, the Likeable Ride. It's just like a watermark for copyright. And that's basically it then. Click on export and it will save it then to your file that you've selected up here on your PC. You can then upload it to social media. So that is just a quick insight on how I would edit one of my photos from start to finish. It was run through fairly quickly. If you are interested in this software, there's plenty of other tutorials out there on YouTube that break it down stage by stage, and it's a lot easier to learn. But that's just basically a run through of how I would edit one of my photos. Now, if you are interested in this software, it's from AdobeLightroom. I rent it basically, and you pay monthly, a monthly payment. I think it's like €12, and you just rent the software. The advantages is that you're kept up to date. You're always up to date with the newest software, and that's with all in the price. You can buy the software outright. It's very expensive, but then for every subsequent update that you then ask for, you then have to pay on top as well. So you have to pay for the update. So not ideal. Well, hopefully that has been of interest to you. If you did enjoy what you saw, then leave me a like down below. If you didn't like it, then click the dislike button and maybe add a comment down below of what you didn't like and what else you'd like to see within the video. If I would change anything for you. And I'd just like to say thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care, ride safe. See you out there. Now, before we dive into the video, Photos. We're doing photos today. Why can't I talk? If this is something that you are looking into, I think I'm just going to give up. Oh God, this is going to be a long day. Any sort of camera device, you need to be knowing, you need to be an absolute throbber. Let's just be clear on that. If you are interested in photo editing and photography and talking absolute garbage. Now, before we dive into the this is just not going well. What's this? How long have we been going now? 5 minutes, and all I've been doing is outtakes. Awesome. Oh my God.